Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel Beth Chats Books. Now today is not going to be a book kind of video because I haven't managed to read much aside from my non-fiction picks that I can't talk about because they're part of the BookTube prize. So I want to talk about some TV and series that I've been watching that I've actually been really enjoying, and I haven't done this kind of video in a while, so I'm going to class it as monthly favourites. I'm going to put it in that playlist. It's kind of not monthly because we've just started in May, but I guess all of these I actually did watch in April, so I guess they are monthly film favourites. So waffle over, I'm just going to get into a few of them and have a little bit of a chat. So I'm going to have to get through the giant elephant in the room. First and foremost, if anybody's been watching any TV at the moment, they should be watching this programme, and that is the BBC adaptation of Normal People by Sally Rooney. So this is on BBC iPlayer. I don't know whether there's anywhere to stream it for booktubers who are living in the US or Canada or overseas, but I'll put the links down below if I can find any. So Daisy is the actress that plays Marianne, and I forgot who plays Connell. I always want to say Conal, but it's Connell. It's Connell. And this adaptation is so good. It's so beautiful. So I read the book many moons ago, and I actually really didn't connect with the book. I know for so many people it was their go-to book, their favourite book of that year. It just blew up BookTube and it blew up Bookstagram, and it was just huge. And I've had some really interesting discussions in the last few days with my mum about this book, because the series has managed to elevate this book. Now, somebody who's a book lover, I always usually pick the book over a series, and a lot of times you get told from people who've read the book, when you watch a series, the book gives you more, it enhances these characters, it fleshes them in a better way and more thoroughly than the series. That's usually what you get told. What I noticed is that I had the opposite reaction with this series. I think this series really fleshed out some pivotal characters, including the two main characters, throughout. So they're half-an-hour episodes and there's 12 episodes in them. And what I loved so much about this is I really didn't understand Connell very well in the book. I think because it's written by a woman, you almost can't help but see that women's feminist thread throughout the reading that sometimes doesn't do justice to male characters. Not all the time, but in the reading experience, I felt like what Sally Rooney really wanted to get across was how poorly Marianne had been treated by her brother, her mother, by people at school, and how underconfident she was, and how she was looking for someone to fill that emotional void, and how Connell presented that for her, and then how he treated her poorly at school and things like that. But we really saw a development in the series of his character that was so beautiful. It made me cry some bits when he kind of manages to assess his feelings and process them and be open and honest. Marianne from the beginning is very honest about her feelings, and in quite an unconventional way. She says quite early on that she likes him. She, wants, in the sex scene, she says, "Can we get naked now?" She's kind of straight to the point. And I loved that he was the English student, and there's a lot of things you can tell what's going on internally and in his head that he just can't process, and so that complicated issue with masculinity and how that's really problematic for him, and their two separate journeys and how they converge is just beautiful. I really love Lorraine, who is Connell's mother, and how in the series they've managed to give her the well-roundedness that she deserves. She's not always in the book, but she was one of the characters I loved in the book. One of my favourites from the book, and one of my favourites that's translated really well in the series, which I'm really happy about, because she is very supportive of Marianne. She's aware of Marianne's mental health issues, that she is so vulnerable, that she's being let down by family, that she's so intelligent, she has so much to give, and she actually is really frustrated by her own son's behaviour and the way he hides his relationship with Marianne, and how destructive his attitude towards her sometimes can be, how he wants to keep things a secret and he's confused and he messes her around. And I love that, because I think Lorraine would be the kind of mum that I would be. I would be open and honest with my children, but you know, if I have boys or I have girls, I think a relationship between a mum and a son is usually depicted as they want to protect them and the boys can do no wrong. But I think I'd be a Lorraine mum who would be constantly checking that, because as a woman who's felt pain and heartbreak, which we all have from stupid men at some stage, and obviously non-binary relationships or gay or queer relationships, I'm sure that happens just as much. But I can really relate to Lorraine feeling how she'd have felt in that situation, and seeing it through Marianne's eyes and holding Connell accountable, I thought was amazing. It's just so beautiful, the music in it. Both of them are the most stunning teenagers and uni age students that I've ever seen on TV, just physically gorgeous human beings. The acting was so tender and it was so understated and beautiful, and the scenery, the music, the complicated relationships, the will they won't they element, it all translated so well on screen, which I didn't have that experience reading it, which I wish I had. So I might actually go back and read this again, and maybe it was just right book, wrong time. But this gave me everything I wanted the book to and more, and it's so multi-layered, and I actually could talk about it for an hour just on its own. I have so many thoughts, but I'll rein them in, because obviously you don't want me to just waffle for that long. But if anybody wants to have a bit of a discussion with it and about it, if you've watched it, just pop a comment down below and I would be so enthusiastic and happy to have a chat with you about it, because I loved it. And anybody who's in the UK right now, get on iPlayer and watch it, because it's 12 episodes, but they're half an hour long, so it's almost like just 6 standard 1 hour episodes, and you will get hooked, I promise you. So I watched that. Then another series that we've been watching is called Blood. Now this, apparently season 1 came out in 2018. This again is set in Ireland, like normal people, surprisingly actually. And the first series deals with one of the children. So there's Kat, Fiona and Michael, who are brother and sisters, and their mother is really poorly with MS. I think it's MS. And she's dying, and the father becomes a carer, and Kat, the youngest, is no longer living in that area. She's further out. I think she lives in Dublin. And she comes back because her mother's died and she's attending the funeral, but then there's a bit of suspicion about whether the father was involved. And that was really interesting. It went in a very different way than I expected, and because the suspicion from the outset is that it's the dad, it goes in quite interesting ways. It doesn't play into that. It plays devil's advocate to that the whole way through, even though Kat has lots of secrets about her father that constantly toy you in the two ways. So I think it was really well done. And then what I found so interesting is the second series of it. It's come out and it's currently on Channel 5, I believe, and I think the other one is on Channel 5 on Catch Up online. So I'll link all the information so you can go and have a little nosy. But the second series of Blood focuses more on the eldest sister, Fiona, who has been diagnosed with the same condition as her mum, which I believe is MS, and she's starting to lose cognitive and physical function in certain things. So she's starting to get shakes, and she's noticing her mobility is getting worse. And then we kind of learn a little bit about her relationship to her husband. There's some secrets and things that were not approached or addressed at all in the first season. And we look at the father's relationship to Fiona, because we kind of got the impression in season 1 that Fiona is his favourite. She's got the opportunity in season 2 to come out as very multi-layered and multifaceted, and lots is going on there. So I don't want to spoil that, but I found it really interesting. And what I was so surprised is that from season 1 and season 2 there was no connection in some ways. It just took the story off in a completely different direction. Kat's barely in season 2, and she was a very prominent and influential figure in season 1. Even the relationships twisted and turned in a really interesting way. For example, Kat had a really intense friendship association with one of the police officers who becomes a detective and an inspector and gets a job rank in season 2, and it's almost like they're strangers when they interact in season 2. It's really interesting. It's almost as if 2 completely different perspectives are going on in the same family. I found that really interesting. So you can actually watch these without them in chronological order, because the stories don't really converge in a natural way. There's a little bit of a suggestion of the mother's death being suspicious in season 2. There's references to it fleetingly, but they could easily be standalones on their own. So I was really interested in that, so I would recommend that. And then we watched the strangest programme in the world, but we loved it, and it was called Devs. So I think that's on Catch Up on Sky at the moment. So it follows Lily Chan, and she works in it's almost like a Google company. It's one of those artsy-fartsy, creative, random places in the middle of great valleys and all lush and foresty, and it's just random. So she works there at Amaya, it's called, and it's like a tech company. She works in encryption and how all that works, and she is going out with someone called Sergey, who is also working in this Amaya, in this community, this techie world, and he then gets recruited to Devs within Amaya, which is the development team, and there's some secret project that nobody else in Amaya knows about, and the people have a set rule that they don't talk about it when they go home, and we shouldn't know anything about it. In the first episode, we're almost through Sergey's eyes. We have no idea what is going on in Devs, and it's all a bit futuristic, and there's gold everywhere, and there's these elevators in midair that it just kind of, there's a force field through the elevator at the first episode that just threw my mind. It was all very futuristic. And then we find out Sergey, this isn't spoilers because this happens in the first episode and it leads on, but Sergey, we find out, is a Russian spy, and he was trying to steal the code from whatever Devs is, and they find out and they kill him, and then they frame it as a suicide. Lily's girlfriend is highly suspicious that this is strange. He works at Devs for a day, and then they said he committed suicide. Nothing really makes sense, and so she goes on this epic adventure, surrealist sci-fi style romp to find out what happened to Sergey. Was it a stitch-up? What on earth is Devs all about? And why did they kill him if they did? What's going on? What's this big secret? So absolutely gripping, compelling, surreal. I don't really usually like futuristic, but we were absolutely hooked. It's very, very strange and odd. There is a lot of violence, so that might trigger a lot of people, and it has some really interesting music, which I found really painful to listen to. It's almost like violins, but at a pitch and kind of out of tune in a way that grates, almost like chalks on a blackboard. I found it really painful, but that's the whole point. It's meant to, at certain elements, enhance the weirdness of a moment, which was just done brilliantly. And then there's a lot of sound effects and other little strange oddities that they've chosen throughout it, which is just phenomenal. There's this creepy, larger-than-life statue of a girl, which we find out later on is because Amaya was the name of the girl, and the guy who created the whole tech company had a little girl called Amaya who he lost. But the way it plays the creepy music and zooms in on her face sometimes, it's just terrifying. And honestly, I think it is one of the best series that I've seen this year. Definitely this year. I mean, I love Normal People, but this is just a different calibre. There was so much thought that went into it, and I think it's slightly more impressive than normal people because I have no idea what was going to happen or did happen. So there has to be a second season. I'm adamant there has to be. But it went in a really interesting direction, and I'm really enthusiastic to see where they'll go with it. But if you haven't heard of it and you're into that kind of futuristic weirdness, or even if you're not, but this sounds like something that you might give a go, I would highly recommend. Very, very interesting, and it's kind of stuck with me since. A very visceral experience is how I describe it. And then I've watched the second season of Afterlife, which is the Ricky Gervais programme about how he's trying to cope with his life now that his wife died of terminal cancer and his dad has Alzheimer's. It's on Netflix, so I don't know whether the US will have access to it, but I'll link it down below. It was phenomenal in season 1. And season 2 was just as good. It's this dark humour, that things that you shouldn't be laughing at, you're laughing at. And what me and my brother were describing it as is I don't usually like Ricky Gervais comedies because he's always quite sarcastic and dry and it's not accessible. But this has all of those elements that are typically Ricky Gervais, but with the underlying current of this humanity and vulnerability. The scenes where he's crying and from a British perspective, we've never seen him this vulnerable in anything he's ever done, and I don't know whether there's fans in the US of him, there possibly is, but I've always seen the snarky, pompous, sarcastic character, and to see him in floods of tears in certain scenes and to take such a difficult topic like death and give it so much beauty and poignancy and the dignity that it deserves as a topic is just gorgeous. And there were bits that have you choking and welling up because it's just so beautiful, and that juxtaposing of the dark comedy with the really heartbreaking tragedy and the honesty in that depiction is fantastic. So I would really recommend that. It's also led us to watch Extras, which is something he did quite early on in his career, where he got kind of celebrities to feature in episodes. That's also on Netflix, so I'll link that down below as well. And some of the people that he got on it and some of the things he made them do, he had Kate Winslet on it, Daniel Radcliffe, Vinnie Jones, just a whole host of fantastic, Chris Martin. And it gave me a new appreciation because I never really was a fan of his kind of comedy. My dad really loved it, so he's reintroduced me and my brother to it. And we've actually been laughing out loud. We thought it was really funny. So a lot of you will probably have already watched Extras, but that's something to, if you really like Afterlife and you want to see more of what his comedy's like, I would highly recommend. So we're slowly going through that as well and enjoying that. And then I've just got two that kind of link on. So I watched the documentary, the Trixie Mattel documentary Moving Parts, which is also on Netflix. And this was a bit of an emotional punch in the gut. I did not expect it. So my sister was recommending that I watch it, and I obviously love Trixie Mattel, who was the All-Star Season 3 winner for RuPaul's All-Stars Drag Race. And I obviously watch on YouTube as well his YouTube videos with Katia, and their friendship is really electric in that, so I was quite excited to see it. And I saw at the beginning it features Jinx Monsoon and Ben de la Creme and a lot of other great drag stars, so I thought it was kind of going to be a bit of how he won the show and where he went from that, but it also had a really dark undercurrent, so it was quite bold, discussing about Katia's rehab and about her addiction issues, which was addressed quite early on in the documentary. And I'm quite surprised that that went ahead in the filming, and that, you know, they obviously got the relevant permission to have Katia at that stage, because it was quite a harsh look at that. And then also how it affected Katia and Trixie's relationship. You could see that Trixie was really struggling with the possibility that the show wasn't going to finish with the two of them, because Katia was admitting herself into rehab, and about how it took a toll on their relationship, how Trixie felt really uncomfortable about talking about it or dealing with it. And then we found out that Trixie later on in the documentary talks about how she was abused emotionally and physically by her stepfather. and how drag has kind of been a form of therapy for a lot of these drag stars who have had a lot of difficult backgrounds, and about Trixie wanting to pursue country music and the passions, and just a very holistic view of Trixie outside of drag, and just how the drag world works when the cameras have stopped rolling, almost. That's what it felt like. And adapting to fame, how the mental health is. You know, Trixie references in the documentary that she's quite a happy person, but has gone through quite a lot of unhappy things, and this saboteur element that's discussed in RuPaul's Drag Race, of that part of you that doesn't think you'd be good enough, is addressed, and then when success happens, and how you cope with the fact that there's a part of you that doesn't ultimately feel like you were a worthy winner. With Trixie, you can see that. It's not necessarily elaborated on lots in the documentary, but I found that really poignant, because Trixie will always reference at the beginning, she was watching when she first came in season 7, I believe, and she didn't do very well, and how that is still really painful for her to watch back, even though she ended up winning the All-Stars. And I think for a lot of the drag stars, where they place and how well they do is of fundamental importance, and their failures will stick with them as much as their successes, which obviously can be looked at in all walks of life. But I found that really interesting, and it was really honest. So if you love RuPaul's Drag Race, if you love the drag race scene, if you love any of the stars, and particularly if you like Trixie and anything to do with Trixie's music as well, then you'll really enjoy this documentary, and I really enjoyed it. Highly recommend. And the last one is also a documentary, and it's called The Circus of Books, and this surprisingly links on with the drag race theme, because this is about a Jewish couple who set up a gay porn bookshop, and they obviously have a lot of the LGBT community work for them, one of them being Alaska, who was one of the drag stars on RuPaul's Drag Race, who she won All-Star Season 2. So she features in it briefly, so that was my little segue. But this is such an interesting documentary, especially because later on in the series it addresses how one of their sons ends up coming out as gay to the couple, and you would think they would be quite liberal about it, considering they own a gay bookshop, but they see it more as a business than any ethical predicament or situation that they've decided to put themselves in. They see it strictly as business, and they try and disentangle any ethics out of it. And this leads to a few issues, particularly for the mum in the couple, not so much for the father, who is less orthodox Jewish than the mother. She really struggles when their son comes out as gay, which is interesting because from the outside a lot of people herald this couple as revolutionary for the LGBT community, allowing them to have access to pornographic images, films, books, and almost a meeting place for the LGBT community. So she has now, her and her husband, dedicated themselves to a charity that support the parents of gay people and LGBT people. And how she said, you know, she promotes a lot about her own experience to try and get people to be less conservative about gay rights. And then there was a whole section about how they were threatened by the federal government for releasing these films and these images and allowing them to cross state lines. It was really interesting and not what I expected, because a lot of the time you get these kind of documentaries about LGBT and their struggles from somebody who's either LGBT and from that community, or someone who's an advocate of it who supported them. So it was really interesting that this couple didn't actually choose this route and that they came to accept it over time. And it's really interesting because the documentary is actually created and supported and produced by their daughter, who is interviewing both of them quite intimately and her siblings. And there's quite a poignant moment when they discuss the son coming out as gay and how she feels really distressed that he had so much anxiety about it, and he really felt like he was going to be disowned because that's not what her experience is. And she kind of was artsy back in the day, and it didn't really allow us to figure out whether she was queer or identified as bi, or whether she was straight. She didn't really address her own sexuality, but she kind of was very flamboyant and eccentric, and she said that finding out that her parents owned this bookshop was revolutionary because it kind of aligned with her personality, which is really interesting because she saw a more liberal side of her parents at the same time as they are projecting this liberal side to the world while also having conservative religious views that didn't tie in with their own son's sexuality. So there is so much going on in this documentary, but it gives a wider depth than the kind of intro trailer suggests. So again, if you're interested in LGBTQ rights, if you're interested in the drag scene, if you want to see Alaska on it, go ahead. But it also created a depth that I really, really appreciated. So there's some things we've been watching and loving, just letting it be known that all of them I love tremendously, and I will link down below. I encourage you to watch them if you want to, but I would also love to know what you've been watching, any recommendations, because I am binge watching a lot of stuff at the moment in between doing some reading. I'm really enjoying that, so if you've got any recommendations, let me know. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll be back very soon with a brand new video.